Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the studio tonight. I'm going to paint for you tonight a statue of a woman. I don't know if it's in a church courtyard or in a cemetery. It's a woman. She's kind of in a reflective, thinking pose here. I love the look of this concrete or marble, chiseled, aged, weathered. It's fantastic. It's got a lot of texture, a lot of color. I've quickly pre-drawn my painting and my picture, and I'm just going to wet it down, and we're going to drop in a lot of the color of this, the nice yellows, nice browns, in to begin with. We're going to get those right out of the way, and then we're going to get into some shadowing. So let me just wet this painting down a little bit. There we go. Trying to keep inside the lines. It doesn't matter that much if I stay inside the lines. Our background is going to be fairly dark, and so if I do go outside the lines ever so slightly, I will be able to touch that up. Okay, I've got just a little bit of extra water on there. I'm going to use my spray bottle and loosen up my paints and my palette. It's been a few days since I've been able to paint, so I'm letting those soak for just a second. Okay, mixing up a little yellow ochre, raw umber, and a little orange oxide together. That's going to give me a nice base for this statue. It's going to give it a warm feel. My last painting I did a cold painting. This one's going to be a nice feel, like maybe on a summer night. You're out and this is illuminated a little bit by a light in the church, or some starlight, or a full moon maybe. But I'm just going to lay in some color, and I'm going to let the water take it wherever it goes. I'm going to drop in a few darker colors and just begin to give some shape to this painting. Not a lot, but just a little bit. Okay, since I pre-wet the painting, the paint doesn't always immediately run all the way to the edge. I'm just making sure it's going to get there, and tapping off a little bit of extra water to avoid some back runs. Okay, I'm going to mix up a little bit of darker color here off to the side, and it's a little tough. My paints are a little bit dry. There we go, and I'm going to start putting in some of these darker areas. Okay, so my dark is a little Payne's Gray and a little Van Dyke Brown, and if I need to, I'll mix in a little bit of that orange oxide in there to keep our colors kind of a little bit coherent. So here we go. I'm going to drop down to a little bit smaller brush. That first brush that I used was a size 8. This is a size 6, just a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to put this in some general areas. It's going to flow out. See any of the large areas where I have shadows? This color is going to flow out. And my job at this point is just to not let it overtake some of the whites that are there. Those are going to be our highlights. But to let it mix in with all the other colors. It's going to meld in there. It's going to give us some nice gentle shadowing, because we're applying it wet and our colors are still going to run a little bit. So just wherever I saw on that picture some dark shadows, I'm going to drop in a little bit of this dark color. There we go. Her whole arm there is in shadow, so I'm just going to give a little bit of that. There we go. And careful to avoid her arm and her hand. I don't want the color to go onto that because that is going to be standing out in front. Okay, but she does, her arm is round, so it's got a little bit of shadow on there. I'll just put a little bit. Trying to figure out where my light source is at on this picture so I can make sure I get all of my shadows on the right side and my highlights on the right side. And before I go any further, I'm just going to dry this a tad. Here we are. Good. Let's put on our second layer of color now. And this is again my orange oxide, a little yellow ochre that goes in there. And I'm just dabbing it on everywhere I think I've got a mid-range shadow or whatnot. If you've seen some of my videos before, you know I do this a lot. I'll put the color on, and then on one side of it I'll take it right back off. Just let that color blend in a little bit. I know that on her hair I need to come back and put in some darker tones to let the roll of hair look like it's there. So I'll come back as that dries a little bit. I'm just trying to take my cues from my picture anywhere that I think there's a little bit of darker shadow, a mid-range shadow. I'm just going to go and put that in, just drop that in and give it a little bit of blend. There we go. Just barely touching it with a damp brush. We'll pull that right out. I'm going to give a little definition to her face there. Just touch her nose. It's fairly dramatic on her nose there. One side is all in white and one side is pretty heavy in shadow. Alright, right up and down her hand. A little definition to her fingers and her thumb. And we've got her basic identity pretty much laid out right now. You can see it if you look at the picture. So my job at this point is to darken everything up. It's a little too light, so I'm going to go over in several different layers and just add some depth to this. The colors that I'm using now are Payne's Gray and Van Dyke Brown. It's going to give us a nice warm brown color, almost a sepia. And over on her arm, her right arm over there, it's pretty heavily in shadow back there. I'm going to use a little Payne's Gray. In fact, I ran out. I need to put a little bit more on the palette and mix it up. Alright, here we go. Oh, yep. That Payne's Gray right out of the tube comes out pretty strong. There we go. Going right around her fingers. I want her fingers to be defined. I want you to see that she's got fingers there. And underneath her hairline, it's quite dark in the picture. So I'm going to put some more of that on. My darkest grays are not quite as warm. I could have made them a warm gray or a warmer gray, but I chose to leave them a little bit darker. I could also have made them a little blue. That would have been a choice, give them just a bluer tint. But again, I chose to just leave them at that with that Payne's Gray color with just a bit of Van Dyke Brown in there for warmth. And you can see with each little bit of paint we put on, we put it on and brush it out. It's just adding more and more details to our painting. Here we go. Those are some rolls on her sleeve. There. Some folds in the robe or the skirt that she's got on. There we go. And as that moves up to her shoulder, it gets a little bit warmer, a little bit more in the light. So I'm adding a little bit of Van Dyke Brown to it. Let's see. I need to add a shadow to the other side of her arm. It's going to give it a lot of roundness. That's pretty heavy color, but we'll blend that out, and it is Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray does tend to dry quite a bit lighter than it goes on. There we go. I'm going back and adding a little extra definition to her fingers, and again pulling the color away. I just want to leave an indication. I don't want it to be a super dark shadow at this point. There we go. I don't want it to be a super dark shadow at any point. I would rather put on 4 or 5 or 6 layers to get the right shadow that I want, rather than put on one layer and have it be really heavy. And you can see what I'm doing there. I put the color on, and then just with the tip of my brush, just a damp brush, I take some of that paint away. Alright, I'm going to define her cheek. Right there. Her ear is in shadow. I'm not really going to see it, so I don't have to worry about painting it, but her cheek and her neck, the side of her head, all in deep shadow there. So I'm going to give it a dark color. And as it comes out of that shadow into the light a little bit, I'm going to warm that up. Let's see, I need to look. I'm trying to define her eyes. Her eyes are tough because her eyelids on the painting are on the actual picture are lit up. Everything around her eyelids is kind of in the dark. So I'll do that just a bit on both of these. There we go. And a bit under her eye. Let me pull that down, and you can really see her eye starting to stand out there. Just behind her nose. And I think that shadow on her nose is just a bit strong. I'm going to dab a little bit of that off. Got it. Underneath that hairline. It's dark under there. And you can see as we continue to go through this, and as we continue to add a little bit more detail and a little bit more detail, we make it a tiny bit darker each time, that we're adding a lot of depth of detail to this. With each time we go through this, we can add another detail or another 2 details. And we're going to continue to develop this painting by doing that. I just need to turn this a little bit to make it easier to do my brush work. There we go. The outside of her robe, part away from her body, hanging down off of her arm in quite a bit of shadow. That's a little crease in her robe. It just makes a little indentation. There we go. And again, back to that hairline, where the hair falls onto her shoulder. Does make a nice shadow. I put it on, take it off. There it goes. Now, this is a hard part. That whole arm is in shadow. So I need to darken it up just a bit. Okay, looking at the picture, there must be more I need to do. She does have some texture on the top of her head. Just some indications of some individual hairs and some chiseled out areas. So I'm going to do there. I'm just going to put some darkened areas in there. And I've moved to an even smaller brush at this point. Alright. I put my shadows on the wrong side of those. I blended them out on, I'm sorry, I blended those on the wrong side. I should have blended those on the other side. So I'm just going to take those right back out and move on with the rest of her hair. It's beginning to take shape and take some form. There we go, just ever so slightly. Pull some of that color off. Very good. Adding a little darkness there to give her head a little roundedness. Here we go, working on that hairline quite a bit. Just take some of it away. And again, you could continue to do this on this painting for a long, long time. And each time you get it, you would get a little bit more detail and a little bit more detail and a little bit more detail. And you're building it up layer by layer by layer. And you're making it more deep to look at and more more alive and more realistic. Okay, she's got just the indication. It's worn away quite a bit, or it never was chiseled in a whole lot to begin with, but just the indication of the neckline of her robe that she has on. Goes up there, and now I'm just putting in some extra darks, some final details. There we go, a fold on her robe. And that's pretty good for her, I think. I'm going to put in my nighttime background. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to give her a little bit of age. I'm going to tap some paint onto her, some very small spatters. I don't want anything too large. Just a little bit of spatter, a couple of different colors. And I don't want to get it on the background, and because I don't want it to leave necessarily a mark if I don't get to it and it dries. But I'm going to get to that background pretty quickly. The background is again a much richer concentration of Payne's Gray and Van Dyke Brown. There we go. I'm going to mix in just a bit of green along the side and up in the top, up near her head, right at the top. That's a little yellow ochre mixed in. Here we go. Back to my Van Dyke Brown and Payne's Gray. Just going to go right around her. I'm using the big fat brush, the big fat flat brush, I should say. Makes it easy to make a straight line around there, and you can put a lot of paint on at a time. And just finishing up, making sure I've got it the way I want it. A little puddling on the edges I want to take care of. Very good. I'm going to blow dry it off and let's see how it looks. You can really see the Payne's gray lightening up there when we blow dry it. And there we are. There's the picture. My representation of it. If you like the video, give a like to it in the bottom. Subscribe to my channel. I would love to see you back here in the studio painting with me again. I had a lot of fun this time. I think I'm going to sign this and we'll call it good. Thank you for watching.